Northampton counties and the eastern part of Pennsylvania. Today's hearings will continue our discussions on strategies to safeguard Pennsylvania's infrastructure, local economies through a reliable workforce, and most importantly, our workers. I want to thank my colleagues in person on Zoom. We've got Senator Tartaglione joining us and Senator Fontana. To my right is Senator Lindsey Williams, Senator Piscitano, our leader Costa, and Senator Patty Kim as well. I want to turn over to Senator Costa for some opening remarks. Senator Costa.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Miller, and thank all the folks who are here this morning, and thank you for your ability to work with all of you. I want to first start off by saying thank you to the laborers for hosting us here this morning. Joey LaQuacha, I'm not sure Joe's in the room, but opening up this beautiful hall to us to be able to conduct this hearing on an important issue. So thank you, Joe, and the team and the labor guys for doing that. You know, what we're going to talk about and continuing talking about are some important issues that are important to our labor community in terms of workforce classification, also making certain that we're talking about public sector OSHA and other matters as well. And we want to hear what you have to say along those lines, so we're interested in hearing that. And we can take these ideas back to Harrisburg to continue to push and fight for some of the things that we all know collectively we agree upon. So thanks for being here and look forward to hearing all your testimony. And thanks again to Joe and the laborers.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Williams, opening remarks.
Thank you, Senator Miller. Thanks for being here. I love to see you all. I know we got a whole host of issues today to talk about, all ones near and dear to my heart. Right now, working on the construction misclass bill, co-prime sponsor of that bill. That started, just a little story, when I was working at the Teamsters in 2014. And I was working with port truck drivers in the ports of LA and Long Beach. And they were misclassified as independent contractors. They were making them pay for oil changes and tires and things like that, where I saw multiple of those drivers with negative paychecks, like the worst of worker exploitation. And we see that across every industry in the worker misclass space. So I'm excited that we're moving that bill forward in the Senate, and that we're talking about that and custom fabrication and prevailing wage and workplace safety, like all very important. But thanks for being a partner in the work of getting that, specifically that worker misclass bill, hopefully across the finish line finally. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to your testimony. I'm going to unfortunately have to leave a little early. I've got an event in my district, but it doesn't mean I'm not listening carefully to what you all say, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Piscitano, opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the laborers for hosting us, of course, and all the testifiers. We really appreciate the information you're about to provide. And we talked a little bit earlier this morning that you guys are on the front lines of the evolving work landscape in worker spaces, right? And legislature is sometimes a little bit behind the times. We rely on folks like the testifiers today and other workers to bring issues to us so that we can address them, because sometimes, we don't know that they're there. And so having hearings like this are important, and keeping lines of communication open so that as things evolve and issues start to arise, we can address them as quickly as possible in Harrisburg. So thank everyone for participating today.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kim.
Yes, thank you, Senator Miller, for your leadership and for bringing us here together. Good morning, everyone. My name is Patty Kim. I represent Senate District 15, which is Dauphin County. The capital is in my district. We deal with so many issues every day, and so it's really important for us to sit here and be reminded of the important things that you guys do and what makes life better for you guys and your workers. Nick Piscitano and I left the majority to come here, and we want to continue the work that all the good bills that we passed to continue in the Senate, so that again we can make our workers have a better work life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Tartaglione joining us via Zoom. Some opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Guys, I've been around for a few years, and we've been doing misclassification workers, but I also have the bill for the custom fabrication with prevailing wage, and it also addresses the split rates. I've been doing minimum wage for the last 19 years. And for the last 13 years, I have had public sector OSHA. So these are all issues that we're going to talk about today. and I look forward to your input. And I would like to thank the laborers for hosting us. I'm sorry I couldn't get there personally, but I am here and I'm listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And so just for everybody's knowledge, this is part of a two-part series. Last month we were in Philadelphia talking about workers' protections. We had some really good testifiers and information there. Chris Halleck from the Deputy Secretary of Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry highlighted those misclassifying workers affects employees, law-abiding businesses, and communities. This leads to reduced tax revenue for communities, adversely impacting parks, schools, and emergency services, and putting additional strain on our healthcare system. Mike Ford, Secretary and Treasurer of the State Building Trades, representing 130,000 construction workers in Pennsylvania, discussed the impact on publicly funded job site. His testimony stated contractors who underpay workers can unfairly underbid law-abiding companies, which benefits only wrongdoers at the expense of everyone else. Today's hearing will continue this conversation of what is needed to protect our workers and the economy currently facing these challenges. Again, I'd like to remind, there's been some movement on some of these bills, but until the governor signs it, our workers are still unprotected on some of these fronts. So with that, we'll open up to our panel. We have one panel today. We'll start with John from the Laborers Union. Again, thank you to the laborers for hosting this. And with that, we'll open it up. John Schultz from the laborers.
I'd like to start by saying thank you to everybody today. As we all know, strong prevailing wage laws protect local wages and strengthen local economies. Unfortunately, there are some flaws in the state enforcement and application of these laws. Worker misclassification, cumbersome rights to know request process, and RCAP process that awards state-funded to projects that directly undermine the intent of prevailing wage laws are a few areas of concern. As it stands today, RCAP applicants are simply required to obtain 3 bids to apply for their state grants. These bids do not require prevailing wage at the time, often resulting in the most responsible contractors who are already pay the prevailing wage from the competitive participating in the bidding process or even being invited from the beginning. Once a project is awarded, the RCAP recipient is expected to honor the current prevailing wage laws. The current structure of the RCAP often rewards the most scrupulous contractors who pay the least in wages upfront. In addition to unfair bidding process, RCAPs are often awarded for specific portions of the project, not the entire project from the start. All wages outside of the portion of the work are not subject to prevailing wage laws. Again, rewarding the most irresponsible employers, contractors. RCAPs are a form of public funding, and it would be benefit all Pennsylvanians if applicants were held to the same standards as any of the publicly funded projects. Strengthening the RCAP process by eliminating geographical demarcation and requiring the same bid process required for all public projects would protect the integrity of our prevailing wage laws and strengthen our local economy and overall help everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Ron?
Thank you, Senator Miller. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. You're going to be hearing a lot today about how worker misclassification is the largest problem facing the construction industry today. Amongst the highlights of why it denies workers overtime protection, workers' compensation protection, and unemployment protections, as well as steals from both the government and from insurance companies by improperly classifying workers as independent contractors or simply not classifying them at all. Make no mistake, worker misclassification is a serious issue, but at its base, it's fraud and theft. That's what it is. I would like to talk a little bit about some of the other impacts to the general public that this kind of fraud of misclassifying workers has when it comes to impacting just everyday people outside of the construction industry. Misclassifying worker increases medical costs due to unfunded liability at hospitals. When a misclassified worker is hurt on a project and they go to the hospital, they can't claim it's workers' compensation because they're not covered under it, and they don't have their own medical benefits. So it becomes an unpaid bill. Okay. This in turn leads to medical providers asking the government and asking insurers for help covering this so-called charity care that should be covered by these employers that are engaged in these illegal activities. When they do this, that costs every taxpayer money if they get money from the government. But additionally, when they go to medical providers and say, we need more per visit now, but we're going to raise it every year anyway, but now we really need it, and here's some numbers to show it. Insurers negotiate, but then they turn around and they push down on law-abiding businesses across all sectors of business, not just construction. Everybody's rates goes up. Now, it doesn't stop there, because when the employers get the higher rate for the next year, and in most cases, outside of union construction, people are paying a portion of their medical benefits through their employer, and the employer pays the rest. Well, what do you think the employer does with that employee share? If the price went up, the employee's share has to go up. It is an impact on workers, whether they're working in a hair salon, whether they're working in a warehouse, or whether they're working on a construction site as a result. So that just rolls on down to the employee, impacting regular everyday people. And according to a recently published worker misclassification impact study by the Century Foundation, contractors in Pennsylvania evade more than $431 million that would be otherwise due to the Commonwealth, that could be funding programs and really going towards areas and people who are in need. And you're going to hear from my brothers and sisters up here, you're going to hear notes about several of these kind of reports. The one thing the reports agree on is that unscrupulous contractors are stealing from the Commonwealth. Okay, whether the number's 431 million, 478 million, it's a lot of money. This practice also impacts every honest contractor, whether they're union or not. They simply cannot compete against folks that aren't paying withholdings, that aren't classifying workers as employees and getting lower workers' compensation rates from their providers as a result. And, there's hidden impacts, like if you don't have a lot of employees, then you don't have a lot of injuries. You don't have a lot of incidents. Your incident rate is low. So on paper, your company appears to be safer, okay? And you're able to qualify for more work. The reality is you've just hidden your injuries at this point. And that damages every contractor who's out there who follows the rules, creates careers for people, and puts people to work on a regular basis. The impact on job creation, let me correct myself, it's career creation, is immeasurable. Worker misclassification, or tax fraud as we like to call it, has a compounded impact on minorities, particularly African Americans. These law-breaking employers seek to exploit the most vulnerable workers of the workforce, targeting non-work authorized individuals to come work for them because they know they can take advantage of them, because they're afraid and they won't speak up when they don't get their overtime or don't get all their hours or don't have medical benefits. You can't go into a neighborhood and hire African Americans or females or other minorities that are more accustomed to understanding what their rights are and exploit them. So in turn, this practice steals jobs from the communities that need them the most. And I'm sure here in Pittsburgh, there's plenty of those communities that need those careers to be created. Okay? Every union representative up here today would love to create 2,500 jobs tomorrow, or let me again, careers for residents of our struggling urban neighborhoods. We'd like to create pre-apprenticeships with no cap on them. Unfortunately, we're not able to do this due to the unfair playing field that is in the construction industry today. And that is the fraud of exploiting workers. Finally, I want to leave you with some thoughts. You know, continue this good fight and reject calls of construction industry employers and their representative organizations, such as ABC, to weaken misclassification laws. Those who seek to weaken independent contractor rules, such as Associated Builders and Contractors, do not seek to do so under the guise of cutting red tape, okay? They're seeking to help companies pad profits, and that's it. They are not helping workers in any way, shape, or form. They will do whatever they can do to push that narrative under the guise that they represent workers. They represent 0 workers. They only represent construction company employers. That's a key difference from the folks that are in this room today. I'd like to thank you again for the time to speak here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ron. Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Miller. Members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm here to testify on 2 urgent and interrelated issues impacting Pennsylvania's construction industry. The need to include off-site custom fabrication under the state prevailing wage laws and the widespread harmful practice of worker misclassification in our industry. First off, off-site custom fabrication must be covered. Off-site custom fabrication such as ductwork, piping systems, electrical systems, and elements of the structural steel has become increasingly common on public works projects. These components are essential to the final construction and are often fabricated specifically and exclusively for a particular project. However, because this work is performed off-site, it is not currently covered by Pennsylvania's prevailing wage law. This creates a loophole that allows contractors to pay these skilled tradespeople below the prevailing rate, even though they are performing critical project-specific labor tied directly to a public contract funded by taxpayer dollars. This is not only unfair to the workers, but it also undercuts local contractors who play by the rules. Other states like New York, Illinois, Delaware, and New Jersey have taken steps to close these loopholes by extending prevailing wage protections to off-site fabrication that is custom, project-specific, and delivered directly to the job. Pennsylvania must do the same. I'm going to talk a little bit about the real cost of worker misclassification, particularly the mislabeling of employees as independent contractors to avoid paying prevailing wages, payroll taxes, benefits, and workers' compensation. This illegal practice denies workers fair pay and protections, undermines law-abiding contractors, costs the state millions in lost tax revenue. According to multiple studies, misclassification in the construction industry is systematic and growing, especially on projects where enforcement is weak or the rules are unclear. Misclassified workers have no access to unemployment insurance, no health coverage, and no retirement security. Many of them are immigrants who are here legally or workers with limited options, vulnerable to exploitation. We must increase enforcement, increase penalties, and most importantly, close the loopholes that allow contractors to skirt the law through off-site production or sham subcontracting arrangements. What we are asking, we are urging the Pennsylvania legislature to amend PA Prevailing Wage Act to explicitly include off-site custom fabrication for public works projects, strengthen oversight and enforcement against worker misclassification, provide clear definition and guidelines so that no contractor can undercut their competitors by cutting corners on labor standards. This is not just a labor issue, it's a taxpayer issue, it's a fairness issue, and it is a matter of ensuring the quality and safety of public construction. Let us protect skilled workers, let us uphold fair competition, and let us make sure our laws reflect the realities of the modern construction industry. Thank you for your time and your commitment to Pennsylvania's workforce.
Thank you, Jeff. Todd?
Thank you, Chair Miller. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Todd Farrelly, Political Legislative Director for Sheet Metal Workers Local 19. My local union represents thousands of skilled workers who dedicate their craft to building and maintaining buildings throughout Pennsylvania. I did testify on this before, so I'm not going to go full in, and Jeff kind of covered some of it as well. You know, there is a loophole in this law. This has been around since 1961, prevailing rate in Pennsylvania. It was originally a Republican law, shockingly enough, and it was supported by the local contractors because they saw that contractors from specifically down south were coming up. They were undercutting the local contractors and being able to basically steal this work from not just local contractors, but also the workers in our communities that are paying taxes here, that are spending money here. And this is just a loophole that was not really identified then. It was not really thought of then. And as technology progresses, so should the law. The law should start to grow with the change in our lives every day. So a lot of work back, I'll say back when this was passed, and up to, I would even say, the last 20 years has been done on site, but a lot more work is being done off site. Sorry, I'm bouncing around, but why should custom fabrication be included on the prevailing rate? Boosting Pennsylvania's economy and tax base. The fair wages for fabrication work mean stronger local economies. When workers are paid appropriately, they spend less wages they spend those wages within their communities, strengthening local businesses and significantly bolstering the tax revenues of the Commonwealth. Closing this loophole would generate additional tax revenue from properly classified wages that are currently going untaxed when work is performed out of state or at reduced rates. Now, the fact is, a contractor can pay a worker as low as $7.25 an hour in the shop right now. If they could pay them under the table. There's a lot of ways to cheat with this. In my craft specifically, sheet metal, that's about 30% of the working hours. So 30% of the working hours in the project, and it's increased because of things like what's known as rack systems, where I'll give a case in point, the Penn First Hospital in Philadelphia, the University of Pennsylvania Health System. They were able to build that in a record time because they utilized what's known as this rack technology, where all of the mechanical crafts were in this, it's almost like a frame. It was a 20 foot long, six high, 6 wide, sort of frame, and the ductwork, the piping, the plumbing, I think the sprinkler fitting, and the electrical, and anything that needed to be insulated was insulated within that rack. They were all put in on an off-site facility in West Philadelphia. And I know there was a similar project out here, I think it was Presbyterian Hospital. Similar setup, same thing. Our members did the work, and I think the carpenters and some of the other trades did the bathrooms as well. This was all done off-site, but those working hours were retained. They were retained not just by the local area, but those tax revenues were retained by the Commonwealth. We're always talking about deficits and, we can't pay for this, we can't pay for that. Well, I wonder why. Because people aren't being paid the proper rate. So that's just one instance where this does happen more and more. And we're seeing it on specifically hospitals and pharmaceuticals right now. but you're going to see it more as the technology advances. It's going to be in schools. It's going to be, because it makes the job safer, it makes the job more efficient. And absolutely, I'll agree to that. When this job was proposed as a rack system by this company, Southland, who is a signatory, we basically at Local 19 said, well, we've been building buildings 100 years. Why would we want to change this? But it really is. We're true believers on this. It is a great way to build. But the workers have to be paid the proper rate. So, you know, this is so important for, I think, not just the workers. It's important for the Commonwealth. It's important for, you know, our local communities. You know, it's important for safety. And, you know, we have shops right now all over the Commonwealth that do this work. So I'm just going to close it and say, you know, closing this loophole is so important. One last thing, though. I want to talk about enforcement. There's a common misconception that this cannot be enforced across state lines. Yes, there is the interstate commerce law that is well known, but they've been able to enforce it in New Jersey for 20 years because you use other ways of doing it. I know there's contractor liability. I know they have in New Jersey. They're able to utilize. There's a number of other things they're able to utilize over there. Over here, things like debarment, things like you know, possibly building something into the regs, some sort of structure to be able to do this across state lines. Can the Commonwealth enforce our laws across state lines? No, we can't. Can we get those workers paid? Maybe. It would be hard. But can you bar that bad actor from our market? Absolutely. And it comes down to contractual law. When this was passed in Delaware back 2 years ago, the sponsor of the bill, Majority Leader Townsend, he clearly stated this is about a contract between the state and a prime contractor. And when they are breaking that contract, there should be a punishment. There should be a punishment there. So that is at the end of the day, that is the way. Because if you want to put a business owner in you know, get them to notice something, take a market away from them, and the others will notice and they will fall in line as well. So I respectfully urge the Pennsylvania Senate to support the inclusion of custom fabrication under the Pennsylvania Prevailing Wage Act, correcting decades-long oversight and providing Pennsylvania's skilled workforce the protection and dignity they deserve. This change would not only protect our workers, but will strengthen the very foundation of our local economies and the Commonwealth's tax revenue. Thank you for your time and consideration. I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Todd. Mike?
Good morning, Senator Miller. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the ability to speak this morning, members of the committee. Here to speak on worker misclassification in construction. I think we all know that what we like to call it, so a predatory employer misclassifies a worker as a subcontractor. A study commissioned by the Department of Labor has found that 10 to 30% of all employers have misclassified at least some of their workers. We know that's not our Department of Labor at this point in time, by the way. Why does this matter? A typical construction worker classified as an independent contractor can lose up to $20,000 a year in income and benefits, and that's on the low side. They do not qualify for overtime pay. They're no longer eligible to participate in unemployment insurance or workers' comp if they get hurt on the job, God forbid. They're not protected by the Labor Relations Act. They do not receive employer-provided health insurance or retirement benefits. Workers misclassified must also assume the full financial cost of Social Security and Medicare contributions, rather than split with the predatory employer. That's 12.4% for Social Security, 2.9% for Medicare, saving that predatory employer 7.65% for every misclassified worker for every hour that they work in Social Security and Medicare tax. So and I can speak for an electrician, on a prevailing wage job, that can be a savings to the employer who misclassifies almost $13,000 a year if we're talking 2,000 man hours per employee, per independent contractor. So when you take a typical job site, let's just say, you know, common job today is $1 million. Million don't go as far as it used to. Roughly, you would have, that crew on that job could be up to 10 people. 10 men on that job classified as independent contractors is saving that predatory employer just in Social Security and Medicare tax, $130,000 a year. So now when you're bidding that work, you know, if it's $1 million job, we're talking 10% of the cost of the job. So how can a reputable employer compete when they're being undercut just on Social Security and Medicare by 10% of the cost of the job? So the biggest thing on all this is, and I know that what Senate Bill 72 is going to address a lot of these issues, is to correct the predatory employers that are out there. And this, it happens, it's day in, day out. We see them all the time. And unfortunately, unless you have an individual on that site that's willing to testify, document what they've been doing, who they're taking direction from, and then willing to go to court, then we can hopefully inflict, at least get them made whole for what they should have been being paid the entire time on that job and the protections that they deserve. So, welcome any questions.
Thank you, Mike. Brittany?
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Brittany Rodas. I am the legal director at UFCW Local 1776. I have submitted written remarks that will elaborate on what I'm going to talk about today, but I am going to pivot the conversation a little bit towards a different sector. UFCW represents 30,000 workers across the Commonwealth in various different industries, anywhere from grocery stores to cannabis to meatpacking and food processing facilities. And although their work is very different, they all share the common concern about workplace safety. I could take up this entire hour talking about some of the challenges that our workers face in terms of safety. Our state store workers are not covered by OSHA, so we have public sector OSHA that we advocate for. Our cannabis members are wondering every day whether or not the federal government is actually going to enforce any safety standards against that industry, given the federal prohibition. And then our grocery store workers have the fear of workplace violence and theft every day. I wanted to take the opportunity, though, and uplift and talk about some of the issues facing our meatpacking and food processing facility. We represent over 3,000 of these workers at about a dozen locations across the Commonwealth, and we do the best that we can to bargain with these national employers to ensure that we get as much safety language in the contract that we can, but nothing is ever perfect. This is an industry that is regulated by federal OSHA, but what we've found is that OSHA regulates through patchwork provisions. There's nothing specifically addressing the actual safety concerns dedicated to that industry. And there's been a call at the federal level to address that through legislation, but nothing's been done as of yet. What we also found with OSHA, I don't need to tell everyone here, is that they're significantly understaffed, they're underfunded, and we've had the unfortunate experience of participating in OSHA investigations, and they take months at a time to complete, and oftentimes the workers are too afraid to speak up because of fear of retaliation. So what exactly makes these workplaces as dangerous as they are? Well, first, it's just the job is inherently dangerous. A lot of these facilities operate 24 hours a day. They have thousands of workers under one roof. And they vary in size, of course, so the number of people on a given line at any time will vary. But we had the opportunity out of COVID to really highlight what the challenges are here and how much lack of oversight there is on this industry. The industry itself makes up over $38.5 billion in exports in Pennsylvania, so the opposition to any further enforcement is certainly not because they cannot afford it. Some of the concerns that were addressed by my labor brothers up here with construction also cross over into the meatpacking and food processing industry. Not only will you walk into these facilities and see our workers using dangerous machinery, heavy machinery, knives, scissors, machetes in some instances, but you'll also find that it is an incredibly diverse workforce. In any given facility that you would walk into where UFCW represents the workers, you'd find less than 10% of those workers speak English as a first language, and even more of them don't speak English at all. At the federal level, OSHA requires, in some instances, usually around hazard notifications, to ensure that the workers are receiving information in the language that they speak and can comprehend. But there is no formal standard that requires that across the board for all forms of training or materials that they would receive from their employer that relate to their safety, such as the OSHA regulations or workplace compensation provisions, unemployment, health insurance, anything that would be pertinent to their safety. So you often find that these workers are either inadequately trained and they are afraid to speak up out of fear of being disciplined, terminated, whatever the case may be. A lot of these workers are relying on this to provide for their entire families, given the culture of the workers that work in these facilities. In addition to just the general challenges with language and training, the additional pressure that is coming down from the Trump administration right now in terms of immigration in these facilities makes it, 10 times worse for any of these workers to speak up about any concerns over safety. We're regularly seeing raids in UFCW represented facilities across the country. So any goal of trying to empower these workers to speak up, even with a legal right to be here, legal residency, legal right to work, they're not going to do it. They fear for their communities, they fear for their families. And so it is our job as, the labor unions and your job as legislators to try and uplift the safety protections that we can provide at a state level. This legislation that I'm going to talk about is not preempted at the federal level by any means. It was very, very carefully drafted to make sure that everything we propose here could be done. Last session, Senator Tartaglione and Senator Schwenk introduced Senate Bill 406, which was a comprehensive bill that addressed a lot of the concerns that came directly from our members and our lead reps in these facilities. That bill included mandatory workplace safety committees that mirrors the workers' compensation law, so employers would receive a 5% discount for having them. It required mandatory training in the language that is comprehensible by the workforce, as long as 5% spoke that language. It required translation of materials that are pertinent to their health and safety. And in Senate Bill 406, it also included comprehensive pandemic protections, paid leave, and a couple of other additional provisions that in the House bill that ultimately passed through the House last session with 120 votes were removed in hopes of compromising on something that we could get through the Senate. So the final bill, House Bill 2235, that we were able to get enough support behind to move with a bipartisan way through the House, included the workplace safety committees. It included the language requirements that all training be given in the language that they can comprehend. And it also included the creation of an industry coordinator to help oversee what is going on in these facilities in terms of implementing this law and also make recommendations on safety to better improve it. Unfortunately, despite 120 votes in support of that bill, it got referred to the Senate Labor Committee, where it did not receive any further consideration. This is a top priority for us, and I think that any claims that this is unfair to the industry because we are targeting a specific industry, which is one of the pieces of opposition we got, is a bit ridiculous, because it is intentional to target this industry because it is unsafe. These are vulnerable workers, and they are being exploited at significantly high rates compared to other industries, probably comparable to construction industry, honestly. And so the ultimate bill that we ended up with was a balanced, fair bill. It provides an economic benefit to employers. They save a significant amount of money long-term by empowering their workers to work together to identify hazards, to work with the employer to correct those hazards. So we're asking for support on what the new Senate bill will be, which we likely introduce a comprehensive version and restart the negotiations again to try and get in as much as we can. The bill has not been introduced yet this session as we're working on the language, but the overall topic of making sure that we can provide at least some step forward for these workers to ensure that they have a safe workplace and that they are protected while they work. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our testifiers. At this time, we'll open up to my colleagues for questions. Senator Tartaglione will kick us off with questions. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Todd, we know that we've been working on this custom fabrication and split rate legislation for the last 6 years. We got it for Robinson to be able to move it out of the committee, but once again, it's nowhere. I think we really need to start to put pressure on the Republicans to move some of the legislation that is in the Labor and Industry Committee to put pressure on them. You know, a lot of them are endorsed by Republicans and are given money and they use that money against us. Some of the legislation that we do have, which was, Senator Kane and I have the, construction labor broker, registration. It implements one of the unanimous recommendations adopted by the Worker Misclassification Task Force. Requires construction labor brokers to register with the PA Department of Labor and Industry. And then labor brokers who fail to register with the department will be penalized. We also, with Senator Saval, holds general contractors responsible for paying any employees up and down a work site, even if they are hired as a subcontractor. In doing so, it offers subcontracted employers additional means of collecting when they're not paid for the work they have done. This was the final recommendation made by the Pennsylvania Department of Labor's Joint Force on misclassification of employees. I know that the custom fabrication, can you give me an estimate on about how much? Oh, I lost you guys. 1 second. On how much you think the Commonwealth would be losing if this legislation is not enacted?
Senator, do you mean as far as tax revenue?
Yes.
I mean, I would estimate into the millions and millions, maybe even, tens to hundreds, because it honestly, it's immeasurable. Because at this point, I mean, I know, and he's not here, but Business Manager Broadbent from out this way, from 449, he brought up to some legislators one time, the cracker plant was a huge boon for this region, but one issue that he had was that there were miles of pipe that was put together, that was assembled off-site in Tennessee and then shipped up here. And all of that tax revenue was gone. It went to Tennessee. It was not here. It was not in our communities, not in the coffers of the local and the state house. So it's really difficult to like I brought up these rack systems. They can be built in North Carolina, and they can be shipped up here. And you're talking just hours alone. I'd have to run a kind of look at go back and look at all of our hours from that, just the assembly side. But you're talking 100,000 hours at least, just on that sort of work. And you could be, I mean, just extrapolate the tax revenue out from there. At whatever the current rate was. I think for the sheet metal worker then it was just taxable wage. I think it was maybe $55 an hour then in Philadelphia. So that's a lot of money.
We're going into our 7th year of negotiations. Have you got a commitment from Senator Robinson to run this bill?
Yes, I have.
Do we have a commitment from Senator Pittman to run it out of the Senate?
There's been a conversation. Positive conversations are being had. I know just as of last night, President Business Manager Brian Bush, who sends his warmest regards, there was an event, and him and Assistant Business Manager Jerry Gantz were able to speak with Senator Scott Martin as well, and we're currently setting up a meeting to speak with him, because that was one of the roadblocks from last session. So we're doing our due diligence on that end. Currently, I'm working with not just within Local 19's territory, which covers about a third of the Commonwealth, but also with my colleagues at Local 12 and Local 44 to set up shop visits for Republican senators so that they can actually see what the process is and how it affects their communities directly. So the idea is to really, because we had a tour with Senator Ferry back a couple months ago, one of our contractors, Geneseo, and he just said, wow, this just connected so many dots for me as far as what exactly this is, because he saw the skill that was needed to do this work in the shop. It wasn't just, you're not just banging out, knocking out widgets. It's not just, stamped fittings or anything like that. It is, custom work for a specific project. So we are, over the summer, we're going to be setting up those tours and going through that and bringing these senators through so that then, and our request is going to be, could you speak with Majority Leader Pittman? Could you speak with President Pro Tem Ward and with Scott Martin on these matters? Not to put pressure, but just to let them know how important this is for workers and businesses within the Commonwealth, because good actors are missing out on this work.
I'm going to switch over to my union, and this will be my last question, Nick. UFCW. I have for over decades, I keep introducing OSHA regulations. Folks out there who are watching, they don't understand. Say that you have a laborer doing work on the turnpike, and on the other side of the turnpike, you have a PennDOT worker doing the same exact work. If the laborer's hurt, they get workers' comp. If the PennDOT employee is hurt, they don't have the same type of protections. And we are once again, Brittany, going to reintroduce the same OSHA bill, and hopefully we can put in enough pressure that it can finally move. So I'm asking you folks to please have your members call the representatives and senators across the state on these issues to let them know how important it is. Because I know when someone that lives in my district calls or writes or makes an appointment, that really affects the decision. So if you could have your members do that, I would greatly appreciate it. With that, I am done my questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Piscitano, question?
Thank you, Chairman. So, Mike, I want to thank you because sometimes when we talk about the misclassification pieces, it can get a little bit divorced from the reality of the situation. And so I think the way that you laid that out in pretty simple terms of how bad actor contractors can really game the system here and undermine the whole process, right? The bidding process, treating workers safely and fairly process. I wanted to hear from some of the other unions, though. Is that consistent with you guys see in your craft as well, that that's a significant impact? I mean, I think your number, an example, was about 10%, and I'm sure that was just an example, but in other crafts, is that a similar percentage? I mean, I know it varies from project to project and everything, but you really do think that the incentives for being a bad actor and undercutting the whole system are there in order to almost push people who don't have the moral fortitude to do the right thing towards that, because it can be significantly profitable, right?
Even contractors that are honest contractors start looking to, just in an effort to compete, they start thinking, hey, do I need to cut corners?
It's a race to the bottom.
It absolutely is. And, a couple of years ago, there was a very good report about worker misclassification in the construction industry that came out of the District of Columbia. It was put together by then AG Carl Racine, and it put the number somewhere between 19 and 24% just on worker savings. And it even was a little short because of the savings on workers' compensation insurance rates. When you're hiding all those hours and all those workers, right. That's pretty significant. Prior to me coming to the Carpenters Union, I was the chief operating officer of a large construction company. And I'll tell you, workers' compensation rates are one of the largest annual expenses that a construction company has. before our company went out and put one screw in a wall or put in one ceiling tile, we were writing a check for $600,000 a year just for workers' compensation insurance because we carried 130 full-time employees. It takes a lot to catch up on that. And believe me, it's tempting to say, what, maybe we should use more subcontractors. And, then it's a short skip and a hop to maybe we should, just misclassify some people, whether they're contractors or not, and just keep them under our umbrella. But the savings is significant. And like I said earlier, it doesn't matter union or non-union. If you're just following the rules and paying what you're supposed to pay, you can't compete with this business model.
And I know you didn't mean it this way, but you said savings, and it's really theft, right?
It's all theft and fraud.
Wage theft, and it's a way to circumvent the system. And then, as you say, honest contractors can't compete.
No.
And so then they get drawn into playing the game a little bit better, and it just is this downward spiral, right? And it's a huge problem. I mean, you said 19 to 25%. That is a huge number for any project. And again, how is a contractor who's doing things the right way even supposed to compete on that project or in business in general? I mean, they have to be profitable to stay in business. And even if you win one project doing it the right way, you're probably not going to win the next couple if all your competitors are cutting costs by circumventing the law and going the wrong way. So it's a huge problem. It can sometimes be difficult to explain that to somebody who doesn't understand the ins and outs of how the system works and how construction works. But I do think that some of the examples you gave today are very helpful to me to try and communicate this problem to a lay audience. So thank you.
Go ahead, Todd.
Just to piggyback on that, there was actually a study several years back out of Philadelphia. I forget who did it, but I believe it was they were looking at the underground economy, and it's roughly $30 million a year was lost in tax revenue, and that was just in the city of Philadelphia alone.
Okay, thank you. I've got two questions. Senator Coster, Senator Kim. Brittany, you mentioned the industry coordinator. Is that an L&I hire? What's the kind of can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so the intent is to have a specific person in L&I that has industry experience and knowledge and also understands the intricacies of the law in order to better facilitate conversations between the employer and the department in the case that they are citing them for failure to comply. And I think the appeal of this position is intended specifically to be accessible to workers and to the employer as well. So there's no concerns that there'll be an administrative backlog of trying to resolve any outstanding issues with citations or investigations or anything that's ongoing.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. My second and final question is kind of for anybody on the panel. When we talk about, even in the first policy hearing on this, about enforcement and the number of enforcement officers we have in Pennsylvania, I think it was roughly 36 statewide relative to New Jersey. It was closer to like 95 to 100.
Just in construction.
Just in construction.
Just in construction enforcement, yeah.
Maybe, Ron, if you want to elaborate on that, just the impact of not having the right amount of enforcement officers on industries and workers across the state.
Yeah, I think, a few things to that. One, in Pennsylvania, the investigators have to enforce all of the laws. There are no specialists. There isn't somebody who's just diving into construction industry fraud or looking at worker protection or some of the areas that need to have a light shed on them. There isn't anybody who's assigned to those things. In New Jersey, the wage and hour team for construction, that's all they do. That's all those investigators do. That's all those supervisors do. That's all they do further up the chain in an effort to protect workers there. And it's really impactful. And labor and industry here in Pennsylvania and the head of wage and hour, Brian Smolak, they do the job that they can do based on the resources they have. They work hard. they pick their spots, they're able to hammer contractors breaking these rules. Just recently, right here, you had Romero Home Improvements, the largest Act 72 case in the history of the Commonwealth, right here in Pittsburgh. But they don't have enough to really get it done. I mean, it'd be great if we could get some laws passed where these sort of violations, the fine revenue, it stays with labor and industry so they can build themselves out. Perhaps introduce a contractor registry where that money stays with labor and industry, where contractors who are registering, and that's being cross-referenced with other agencies in the state, whether it's unemployment, whether it's your insurance commission, making sure everything is right and proper, but they would also be helping to finance their own enforcement of the industry. These are things that have worked in other states. It's working perfectly in Delaware, and it's worked for many years in New Jersey. It's very successful there, but one thing I want to make sure is that the issues here in Pennsylvania are from a lack of resources. It's not from a lack of effort on PA Labor and Industries' part, because let me tell you, every time I send something in, they do their best to get out there. Every time I place a phone call, I get a call back. And, I'm very comfortable with the work that's getting done, but they've expressed many times that they just don't have the people to get to everything in a timely manner the way they would like to.
Yeah, and I appreciate that as we're at kind of the height of budget season. Maybe that's something we need to talk about back in Harrisburg.
Yep.
As part of those conversations are those resources, so appreciate that.
Yeah.
Senator Costa, any questions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On that latter point, when we think about L&I employees, we know everything that's going on in Washington, D.C., I think 90-some% of the L&I employees are, I think, federally funded. So that exacerbates the problem as we go forward, but you're correct. Let me start by saying thank you for your advocacy on these measures. We continue to do it on a regular basis, trying to convince our colleagues in the Senate to move these measures forward, but also knowing that you all are pushing as well and having meetings, talk with Senator Pittman and Martin. I think that's important. We know these other states are doing many of these things we're talking about today, but I'm convinced that if any of these measures that we talk about in this classification, whether it be public sector, OSHA, whatever it be, the Hawbaker decision, the situation, I should say, legislation we're working on, any of those things get to the Senate floor, they would pass overwhelmingly. I think we know that. It's just a function of getting them there. So collectively working together to do that, I think, is important. So thank you for that. My question is in terms of the resources lost. For example, you talked about fines that come in or whatever happens. We need to talk. That's a very good conversation to have in terms of having those resources coming back in to be able to self-perpetuate that agency, to keep it going and continue to do and cover the things that are being done to make sure they don't happen as we go forward. I know we've done that. I think my recollection is in some other agencies we do that. I think in the security space, when we get security violations, I think some of the money, those proceeds stay within the agency along those lines. So that's something we can take a look at. So that's a good suggestion. John, I want to talk a little bit about the RCAP situation you talked about. I know that my colleague, Senator Piscitano, was working on RCAP reforms to cover some of the things that you talked about, the phasing and avoiding the prevailing wage and things of that nature. I do think those are good suggestions that you make, particularly as it relates to the bidding process, that if you know that you're required to pay prevailing wages on an RCAP project, that should be part of the requirement to ensure that you recognize that on the front end. Don't submit a bid or whatever, and then come back and say, oh, I didn't know that I had to do all this or whatever. So it needs to be incorporated into the bidding process to ensure that we're all on the same page. Because what happens is they'll come back to the state, they'll come back to others and say, we have a gap in our project and we need more help. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So if we know at the front end that's what the costs are going to be, that's a good way to do it. So I think that's a good suggestion. And I don't know whether Senator Piscitano wants to pick up on that at all, but that's something he's working on. He can possibly explain more of the details he's working on now, John.
Yeah, so thank you, Leader Costa. We're actually working pretty closely with the labor's ledge staff, and of course, we'll bring in all the trades and statewide building trades once we have some product on paper. But the idea is to kind of update the RCAP law and require some more transparency and do close some of the loopholes, or as many loopholes as we can, to kind of update those requirements, because we hear a lot about the phasing issue. We hear a lot about the bidding requirements. The bill will probably also include some public bid requirements and some other transparency issues that we've heard recently plague the RCAP program. RCAP is for redevelopment, right? It needs to be transparent. If taxpayer dollars are being spent, typically those projects are very large. It needs to be transparent about how decisions are made and how bids are made and certified payrolls and a lot of different things that we hear about frequently with that program we're trying to address in this bill. We don't have language yet, but once there is a legislative language, we will definitely circulate it with the interested parties to get all your feedback. I think I said earlier today, and the legislature has to catch up on a lot of these issues. Folks like you and your members, the ones working in the field every day, you're seeing the new loopholes and you're seeing how companies maneuver to avoid or ignore requirements of the law. And so please communicate with us on how that's evolving in the field, because we have to be able to respond to that. But if we're not working out in the field, so we don't pick up on those issues right away until they're communicated to us. So the idea is to kind of refresh the RCAP requirements and add a little bit more transparency to that program so that we can see where taxpayer dollars are going and making sure that they're being used in the proper way. So you'll hear more from us on that in the near future.
Thank you. Brittany, quick question. I know you talked about the meatpacking industry. And I remember during the COVID period of time meeting with Wendell Young and so many others about some of the horrific situations that were taking place with PPE and everything else back in those days. So it sounds like it's an industry that continues to be problematic. You talked about it being a federal regulated or by federal government. Are there any things that we can do at the state level that would not interfere with that? I don't know whether the Fed's preempted or not. I thought you said they did not preempt it necessarily, but are there things we can do in Pennsylvania that would allow for, I know you mentioned some of the things you're working on, but are you afraid that they may end up facing some legal problems at all?
I think there's always a risk of legal problems. People like to litigate just to slow down the implementation generally. So I would not be surprised if that eventually became an issue. Generally speaking, though, OSHA does not have field preemption over workplace safety. So if they're not addressing a specific issue with a specific standard, then the states have the right to pass their own legislation to address it. There were several court decisions on this that said if there is a community interest here in trying to improve the conditions, then we have the right to legislate that as a state. Additionally, any of the challenges that we're at least trying to address in our bill specifically do not have standards addressed at the OSHA level, but they do have guidance that will say, well, in this standard, we mean that you have to make sure that this is understandable or comprehensible. None of that is enforceable, and it's rarely actually something that is held against the employers in terms of accountability. So I think at the state level, we can pass as many safety regulations as we want or safety legislation as we want, as long as it doesn't contradict what OSHA is doing. So if OSHA is the floor, we can go above that any day. We are limited in how many regulations we can pass that require the state to go into the facility and actually inspect, since we don't have a private OSHA. The standard is basically like if you want to regulate your private sector industries in terms of investigations and enforcement, then you have to have a state submitted plan, kind of like we're trying to do with public sector OSHA. So this legislation that we're talking about specifically would not be preempted. I think there is a line that we cannot cross that would eventually reach preemption, but none of that would be addressed through general workplace safety provisions that don't require specific investigation or inspection of the facilities.
Thank you. At the end of the day, telling the story on each of these issues, whether it be the narrative about RCAP concerns and phasing of projects, or whether it be employee misclassification or the OSHA, public sector OSHA. Mike, the way you described it, by breaking it down and informing folks that if you go down this path, and I think, Ron, you've done the same thing, we have to enhance that narrative collectively among the public, because they don't necessarily realize that when somebody goes down that path, it doesn't mean the things you talked about. I think I wrote most of them down. No overtime, no unemployment, no workers' compensation, no benefits, right down the line. People need to hear that that's what's at stake here, and that's why we need to take steps to address it. And that's what we need to share with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, particularly the leadership group, to be able to advance these measures. So I want to thank all of you for your testimony. And just know, I think, that if we're able to get this thing to the Senate floor, you can count on Senate Democrats to be supportive of each of these measures as we go forward. No, there's no question about that. You start with 23 votes right now. Get it to the floor. I know we got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 more votes we can pick up. It's just a function of getting it to the Senate floor to advance the bills that the House has been sending to us on a regular basis. So thank you all for your testimony.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kim, any questions or closing remarks?
Just wanted to raise an issue real quickly. Thank you, everyone, for your testimony. I learned a lot, and I'm with these guys in terms of the issue and worker protection, worker safety, worker benefits, and everything. I'm with you guys. But what I'm worried about right now is actually saving jobs, and I'm glad Piscatano's here because I have an issue that you could be helpful with. So I came, while I was driving here, my office had an emergency Zoom call. We had 5 state reps, Fetterman's office, McCormick's office, the governor's office. We had Cleveland Cliffs and Steel Nuts in my district. I know you guys are very familiar with the steel, but they up and left our steel mill, which makes rail. And that's awful. It's a problem, 500 jobs, USW jobs. But then next door is Duraban, which also has a place in McKeesport. They rely on electricity and water with the steel mill. They make pipes, they manufacture pipes and coating. There's about 260 jobs, but they cannot operate when the steel mill is idle. And so I'm wondering what you guys have seen industry-wide, whether it be ICE raids or tariffs or just people, the economy shrinking, where jobs are being lost. That's a real concern. Now, combination of the steel mill and Duraban, that's over 700 jobs. USW, there's 1688 out there. So I get safety protection, super important, but now I feel like these jobs are leaving too because of our shrinking economy. What are you guys seeing on the ground? If you don't have a response, that's fine. It's top of mind right now when I'm fighting for these jobs.
I'm happy to take the first stab at this one. So Wendell, our president of our union, likes to talk about what the impact of tariffs has had on us already and what we can expect to see. We're unique in that we represent pretty much every single step of the manufacturing through, in slaughterhouses, killing an animal all the way to sale, going out the grocery store doors. And what employers do not like is the uncertainty of what is going to happen. It is worse than if tariffs were just imposed and left alone because they can still plan and manage their workforce that way. So what we're seeing is a hesitation to make any broad strokes in terms of expanding workforce or even, with proposals at the bargaining table because they're leaning on the fact that we don't know what it's going to look like in 6 months. On the other side of it is staffing in general, like with our meatpacking food processing facilities. We are seeing raids across the country. We're seeing raids in Pennsylvania. We are prepared to address those when it happens, but the industry itself is concerned about any pushback against the Trump administration in terms of, refusing access, even if they don't have a judicial warrant. Administrative warrants are enough to get in the door these days, and they're concerned about what that impact would mean on them in terms of funding and grants and all of the other operational needs they rely on the government for. So I think there's some hesitancy there to push back at all, and in the past administration, we had seen them come together and rally around the workers and say, let's put some pressure to prevent them from up and removing, in this case, several legal residents, people that are here with the legal right to work, are being removed from facilities and detained with no information given to us as to how we can track them down or find them. That sense of collective agreement that there needs to be support for these workers has dissipated. So when you pair that with the work shortage, then that leads into what we're seeing in the grocery stores, which is additional work shortages and price increases. And it's kind of creating another COVID-like economy where you can price gouge because you're claiming restrictions, but a lot of times the limitations are in the hands of the employers as well to be able to step up and use their collective voices across the country to try and put some pressure on the administration.
Senator Piscatano or Senator Tartaglione, any closing remarks? Okay. Good.
No, just thank you for testifying today, and thank you for being a great partner.
Thank you, Senator, and so I'll wrap us up here. I want to thank the laborers again for hosting us. There are some light refreshments off to the side here. Encourage everybody to have. You know, part of this is it's common sense, whether it's increasing the minimum wage to closing some of these loopholes. You know, this is something that we want to continue to prioritize. Obviously, the policy committee is prioritizing this because it's meaningful to our caucus, the Senate Democratic Caucus, and we want to continue to work together on both sides of the aisle and with our folks and our friends in the House and the governor as well. So I want to thank everybody. This was recorded and will be posted on our website. If there's any more feedback that you have, you know, we want to thank you for your time for testifying. This is meaningful to see kind of the insight into your industries and how we can be effective leaders across the Commonwealth to make meaningful change. So again, thank you very much, and this concludes our meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.